Alright, you guys, I have another experiment for you guys. We're gonna test what floats and what sinks in different kinds of water. So what you'll need is 4 cups of water, cups, jars, bowls, whatever works. 4 of them, and you need 4 eggs, raw eggs. Or if you have toys, little toys that sink in water, you can use those too. Little toys that are heavy enough to sink in water but still a little bit lighter, those will work. Anything that will sink in water will work. And then you need sugar, you need salt, and you need baking soda. So we are going to do this experiment. We're gonna keep one as regular water. Let's put our signs out so we know which is which. So here's our regular water. We're gonna keep this one as just plain water, and we're gonna see what happens when we put the egg in there. We're gonna see if it's gonna float or if it's gonna sink. So that's our plain water. It's our control variable because that's what we know that's gonna happen. So we know that if we put a regular egg, a raw egg, inside a jar of plain water, it's heavy, so it will sink to the bottom. It won't float up. It'll sink all the way to the bottom. So in regular water with nothing inside, the egg will sink to the bottom. But we are gonna find out if an egg will float or sink in different kinds of water. So the first jar, we are going to put 2 spoonfuls of baking soda in there. We're gonna mix it up really good. So here's the baking soda. You gotta stir it up. Make sure it's stirred up really, really well to mix the water and the baking soda together. So we have plain water, and then with this one we put baking soda in there. Make sure we keep our water separate. We know which jar is which. This one is gonna be our sugar. So 2 spoonfuls of sugar. 1, 2, and we're gonna stir it up really well. In our last jar, we're gonna put salt in there. 2 spoonfuls of salt. 1, 2. You might need a little bit more salt, maybe a little bit more than 2 spoonfuls. We'll just pour that in there. So we're gonna mix it all up, and then here's the cool part. So we know that the egg in the plain water, let me pull you in for that. The egg in the plain water, our control variable, the egg sinks. See how that egg is sunk to the bottom of our jar? It sinks all the way down. Now we're gonna see if the egg floats or sinks in our other liquids. So we have water and baking soda, we have water and sugar, and we have water and salt. So this would be fresh water. This would be the lakes, the ponds. Those are fresh water. These are just for fun. We don't see those in the forest or in the oceans. This is salt water. Salt water is our ocean water. Ocean water is very, very salty. So it's a different kind of water. There's salt water and fresh water. And there are different animals that live in those different kinds of waters because there's a difference. You see how this egg sinks to the bottom of the plain water? We're gonna see what happens if we put an egg inside the salt water. All right, you guys ready? We're gonna also put an egg in these to see what happens with those kind of water. All right, so I have my egg right here. I'm gonna put that in our salt water first. We're gonna see what happens. So drop it in there. Be careful, it is a raw egg. What happened? Look at that. Let me put that next to this guy. Let me move it over. Look, so in our plain water, the egg sank all the way to the bottom. And then the one with salt, what happened? Look, the egg is floating on top. What? Crazy. All right, let's see what happens with our other ones. Here's my egg. I'm gonna put it in the sugar water. Let's see what happens in that. Carefully put it in. That one sank to the bottom. And that last one, we're gonna see what happens when we put in the baking soda. Oh, look, it's floating a little bit. There's a little bit of bubbles, but I think if you mix the baking soda one more, I didn't mix it enough. Look, there's baking soda on the bottom. If you mix it more, it should make little bubbles and make it float a little. But
if you put enough salt in the water, it is gonna make the egg float. And in the plain water, things sink to the bottom. So this happens because when we mix salt with water, it makes the water a little bit heavier. It makes it more dense, which means the water is heavier, and then it'll make the egg float up to the top. In the plain water, there's nothing to make the water heavy, so the egg will sink all the way to the bottom. So the difference between plain water and salt water is that animals that live in plain water, they're easier to sink to the bottom. And in salt water, like the oceans, it's easier for animals to float up to the top. So we see a lot of fish swimming in shallow water, stingrays, they float up to the top easier. And if they were in plain water, they would sink to the bottom, and it would be harder for them to float up. So animals that live in plain water, like crocodiles, they have adapted to know how to swim in that kind of water, because there's a difference. Salt water is a little bit heavier, so that animals and things will float up easier. In plain water, it's lighter, so things can sink to the bottom easier. So those are the difference. And in a sugar doesn't make water. Sugar doesn't make water dense, so it will just sink to the bottom like a regular water. And in baking soda, I didn't mix it well enough, so that's why it didn't work. But if you mix it really, really well, maybe have your mommy's help you mix it with some warm water so the baking soda will dissolve. It should make it fizzy and float up to the top, but I didn't mix it very well, so this one didn't work. But if you mix the salt, if it doesn't float, if your salt water one doesn't float, you might need to add a little bit more salt to make the water a little bit heavier. So those are your two differences. And you don't have to use eggs, but because it's Easter and it's fun, we're gonna use eggs. You can use little toys that you have that sink at the bottom in plain water.
So here's our experiment. We found out what happens if we put an egg in different kinds of water. It sinks down in the plain water, but it'll float up in the salt water. It sinks down in the sugar water, and if you do the baking soda one right, Ellen did not do it right. I didn't mix it enough. It should make little bubbles and float up, because baking soda, it makes things carbonated, so it should float up. So try this experiment at home. You don't have to use eggs. Remember, you can use little toys that can sink, or little gems. They're really cool. Or grapes. Grapes would work. If you put grapes in there, they'll sink or they'll float up if you put enough salt in there. So if the first time you do this and your egg or your toy or your grapes doesn't float up to the top in the salt water, try to put a little bit more salt in there. When you put more salt and you mix up really, really well, it should float up. When I did this the first time, it didn't work because I didn't put enough salt in there. It didn't make the water heavy enough. So you need to put enough salt so that it'll float up. It's that's supposed to happen. So hopefully you'll try this at home. I'll talk to you guys next time.